So this is a common milkweed plant, and some of us, probably nobody here because we're all green, but some of us might see these little bugs and go, oh dear, I've got to go get the bug spray, right? Well, if you're patient and it's a native plant and you keep an eye on those bugs, maybe in a couple of weeks it'll get bigger and then it'll make a chrysalis, and the next thing you know, a butterfly is born. And you have this in your yard. And if you sprayed that bog, you might not have that. And I want to warn you that not all of the beautiful butterflies have caterpillars that are this showy. That beautiful zebra swallowtail and the pawpaw that I showed you, it's a little green worm. You know, so just keep in mind, if you have native plants, you're going to have insects on them. But usually the insects are good, and usually they're, well, I guess I should say good. Usually they're not going to hurt the plant, and they're good in the sense that if they don't turn into something beautiful you'd like to look at, they feed something beautiful that you'd like to look at, like a hummingbird or some other kind of bird. I live in the country where there are lots of milkweeds in the fields. Rarely do I ever see a milkweed with this many eggs on it. It doesn't make sense for a butterfly to lay this many eggs on one plant because there's not enough foliage. The reason this plant looks like this is because it was in Betty Hall's backyard in Lexington, and at that time she didn't have lots of milkweeds. And this butterfly, this monarch, flew into Lexington, migrating through from God knows where, going God knows where, and somehow found Betty Hall's backyard with a milkweed plant on it. She had to lay her eggs. She couldn't postpone it, so that's what she did. If you have lots of milkweed, and other people, preferably in your neighborhood, have lots of milkweed, then you'll be searching and wishing that you had some of these caterpillars on your plants. But again, all these will do is give it a haircut down to the ground, and it'll bounce right back up and grow and be stronger than it was before. Without the milkweeds, we don't have the monarch caterpillars. And the monarch, do you guys know, have you heard in the news how the populations of monarchs are plummeting? You know, part of that is due to what's happened in Mexico where they overwinter, and we sort of like to think that way because then it's not our fault. But the reality is that one of the reasons that the populations of butterflies, and again, everything, they're just an example of the web of life, the populations of butterflies and birds are plummeting simply because they don't have habitat. They don't have something to lay their eggs on. They don't have food to eat. We can take care of that problem. It's not that big a deal. All we need to do is take a little part of our yards, or maybe even a big part of our yards, and transform it into habitat for them. I didn't get, there's another. The insects on the plants also are good for birds. A lot of us feed goldfinches in the fall and winter, maybe in the summertime if you live in urban areas. But again, keep in mind that seeds for them are carbohydrates. They also need protein in the form of insects. That's why a lot of times I see wrens foraging around on plants that don't have anything to eat on them, I think. But then I remember they're looking for spiders or, you know, whatever, the aphids, whatever's on there. Which is a good reason to have birds in your garden because they go into your vegetable garden. This is pale purple coneflower, which is a relative of the purple coneflower that we all know. It's much more drought tolerant than purple coneflower. It blooms a little bit sooner, and it's not so coarse. It's a much more delicate plant and a more delicate foliage. The purple coneflower would be fine in the lower part of the rain garden. The pale purple coneflower would be more appropriate for the edges where it's a little more dry. They probably wouldn't like to have that wet area. Royal catchfly, this is an endangered species in Kentucky. It can get 6 feet tall, but it's a real open, delicate kind of a plant. And as you can imagine, it's really a favorite of the hummingbirds. Blazing star, we have a number of different blazing star species in Kentucky. They're all really beautiful in bud, they're beautiful in flowers. If you plant the different species, then you can have blooms pretty much from midsummer all the way until late in the fall when the goldenrods are blooming. The goldfinches love the seeds, the butterflies love the flowers. They're great cut flowers. Really, you just have to plant some blazing stars, that's all. The prairie blazing star, Liatris pycnostachya, is the best one for rain gardens. It likes to have wet soil, or for the interior of the rain gardens. fall and winter interest. Really, if you have shade where you can plant some spring blooming things, you can have interest in your garden all the way from early spring through winter time with native plants. If you don't have a shady area, what I do sometimes in gardens where it's only sunny and there's not anything that's blooming early in the spring is in this garden, it has daffodils in the spring and other bulbs. So if you plant daffodils and all other bulbs until you get the summer blooming prairie plants coming on and then the late summer fall stuff, you can really have some wonderful interest all year round. This shows, this is actually the arboretum, come to think of it. This is not Betty, this is the arboretum. The taller grasses are Indian grass, and to the left there is narrow-leaf sunflower. The lower in the front is goldenrods, which don't cause hay fever because they're insect pollinated. And these grasses will stay up all the way through winter time and provide some nice interest and particular interest when you get to watch the birds foraging around there for the overwintering insects and bugs. If you don't like your garden all dried up in the wintertime, certainly you can cut it back and just have nothing there, and I have clients who do that, but I think it's nicer to leave them up because it's fun to watch the birds, and I like the way they look, but it just depends on what you like. Asters are particularly important in the fall for the butterflies that are migrating south. And there are a number of ones anywhere from stiff aster, which is about this tall, to New England aster, which you guys might have seen that's way over your head, and wild and woolly, as Amy said. Same thing with goldenrods. There are a lot of different species of goldenrods, some smaller, some taller. They also bloom at various times in the fall, so you can extend your period by planting different species. And this is a blazing star with it. So we have blazing stars that start blooming about the same time as purple coneflowers, if you know, kind of early summer. And then we have other species that go, this is button blazing star, all the way through fall with the goldenrods. Blue lobelia and cardinal flower, these are very nice for the wetter areas of rain gardens. Hummingbirds like both of them. Hummingbirds don't only eat red plants. They just like tubular flowers. And this is a close-up of that one I showed you earlier, which is the narrow-leaved sunflower. Sometimes they call it lance-leaved sunflower. It's very tall, as are many of the prairie plants. You know, there are fewer sun-blooming prairie plants, or plants that grow in the sun. There are fewer ones that are short than tall. You know, most of them are tall and big plants. So you really want to be careful, because if you don't want that wild and woolly look, you need to do some research. These are very tall, the flowers are very tall because the grasses are tall and they need to get up there where they can get some sunlight. You know, the advantage is they're 8 feet tall, they also have roots that are going 8 feet into the ground. You can use tall plants like that in an urban landscape. You just have to really include landscape elements and do a little research and figure out what you want to do with them, or put them in your backyard where nobody but you can see them, and don't worry about it if you like them. You know, there's nothing wrong with wild and woolly. You just don't really want to offend your neighbors by having a yard that looks too messy. This is Indian grass, really fantastic fall color, very, very red. It's hard to get good pictures of the grasses. This is a really nice grass for front yards. It's called prairie dropseed. It has it only gets about maybe 2 feet tall. It has this lovely fountain like this, and then it spikes up these very fragrant flowers. And it's kind of open. You can see how it looks in there. So it's not real coarse and dense looking. So it's kind of like how you think of that monkey grass, that liriope. You can bed things with it. The disadvantage to it is it really doesn't like to be in clay soil. So if you have heavy clay soil, it's probably not something you want to plant without amending the soil. Native grasses provide a lot of habitat for tiny butterflies and moths. Non-native grasses, basically none. I read recently that Phragmites, which has become a really invasive species here in Kentucky, where it comes from, there are 140 different insects that feed on it. Here in Kentucky, there are 4. The insects that evolved here don't have the enzymes necessary to break down the plant so that they can eat it. So, and you know, I was in France and I saw these beautiful black locusts growing along the roadside, and I was so happy until I discovered that black locusts are an invasive species there. So that's the problem. We don't have the insects, France doesn't have the insects to keep them in check the same way that we don't have the insects to keep Phragmites in check, and that balance of nature is gone, and so things take over when they're planted where they don't belong, to the exclusion of the things that should be there that would provide habitat. Does that make sense? It's kind of meandering there. This, the red in the background is the blueberry that I showed you earlier on. It's a very nice color. And then this is that prairie drop seed in the foreground. Bottlebrush grass. This is very nice for part shade areas. It's about maybe 3 feet at the most, generally. And I'm just going to talk about a few vines, and I think we'll be finished, and then we can have discussions. This is pipe vine. There are lots of fences in Lexington. If I lived in Lexington, I'd probably have a fence because I would want to have the privacy. But it's a wonderful thing because it provides you this whole area that you can plant. And even if you have a pretty fence and you don't want the whole thing covered, it really accents the fence to have some nice things growing on it. So this is Dutchman's pipe, which is the only host, no, one of a few host plants for the pipe vine swallowtail caterpillar. This is trumpet honeysuckle. It's not the same as that terrible, horrible, invasive honeysuckle. The only thing the bad honeysuckle has that this doesn't have is that it's very fragrant, and this one isn't fragrant. But the hummingbirds don't mind at all. They love it. And can you see the eensy little guy there in the middle, the hummingbird? And it also, if you grow it on a fence, you put several of them together, it can become so dense that it's actually habitat for birds. Betty has some birds nesting in that tangle growth, and it just blooms and blooms all summer long and into the winter. Also, again, like most native plants, it has berries on it for the birds. There's also a yellow variety, which is just as nice. And you'll remember this possibly as the spicebush swallowtail caterpillar that I told you about earlier, and they eat spicebush or sassafras. No spicebush, no sassafras, no butterflies. So her baby, or not her baby, she was the baby inside of this little leaf that came out, and that caterpillar knows what we have to do to provide habitat. Go native. That's all you have to do. Isn't that cute? Doesn't it look like Walt Disney? It's the cutest thing. So when they're eensy little, they look like bird droppings, and then as they get bigger, they do this and they fold up that little leaf, and they live inside of there during the day so the birds can't find them. And then if you go out at nighttime like I do with your little headlamp on and look for them, they crawl out of there and crawl into another leaf and eat it, and then about daylight they crawl back into their leaf. It's a wonderful thing. And these are the ones that I told you I planted them in 3 places, and in 2 places somehow in urban Lexington, amidst all of the pavement and Walmarts and grocery stores and homes, somehow those butterflies found those spicebush. And spicebush normally grows in the woods, and there aren't a lot of woods around here, so I'm always thinking, how far did they come and how did they find those plants? But somehow, you know, they found those plants and lay their eggs. And if you have them in your yard, so too will they find yours.